Welcome to Political Trade Secrets, an inside look at campaigns and politics, where we pull back the curtain, look under the hood, and investigate all aspects of politics and how elections are won. Now, here's your host, Dustin Olson.
Welcome to Political Trade Secrets. I'm Dustin Olson, and sorry we're a little bit late today, but thank you for everybody who reached out wanting to know when we're going to get started, but thank you for that. And it's great to have you here. It's great to have you here, Sean, and thank you for being here, and I'm looking forward to having a great conversation with you. And, we're going to be talking about some interesting things. We're going to be talking about the Olson Strategy Sweet Spot, something I created many years ago, and it's based a little bit on Sun Tzu, but a very great distinction that people can use to think about strategy. And then we're also going to just talk about some of the things in the news. We have Amy Coney Barrett moving on to the Senate floor for Monday. We have Kamala Harris calling half the country racist. We have the foreign attacks on President Trump and the election, and fake news fact-checking, and I'm sure some other things. But Sean, how you doing?
Doing well. Good morning. Good morning, everyone out there watching and listening. Appreciate that. And from everywhere you can be listening and watching from. I know Facebook, Periscope. We're on 11 different platforms, I believe. So appreciate you being there. If you're listening on Apple Podcast or iHeart Podcast. Yep, I appreciate that, and just glad to be with you this morning. So. Yeah,
and if you are on any of the podcasting platforms, please do leave a review, a rating, and any comments that you have. We appreciate your feedback. It makes a difference. Or follow and subscribe there. And if you have questions or comments today, if you're watching the live stream on Facebook or on Periscope or YouTube, feel free to just post a question, and we'll be able to see that, and we'll be able to respond and bring you into the conversation. It's a lot of fun when we get that feedback from everybody out there. So thank you for doing that, by the way, when you do join the show with us. And it's really exciting. And if you want to reach out to us on Twitter, you can get me at Dustin Olson. On Twitter, it's at Dustin Olson, or you can get Sean at Sean, SEAN_Bartley, BARTLEY, and we will include your comments in the show, and we really do appreciate that. Actually, the feedback that we get does have a big impact on what we talk about. So any questions you have, please do interact with us. And one of the things that's really interesting that we see in politics now, partly because of the technology that's available, is that people are able to have more direct engagement in conversations. And one way that Republican campaigns can do that right now is through text messaging. It's one way that you can actually have a direct conversation with voters. It's kind of surprising, but we live in a world where people sometimes prefer to do text messages. So you can go to tincenttexting.com and you can schedule an appointment to get out. You could have a full service mass texting campaign, 100,000 texts out today if you wanted to. And, if you want to learn more about how to do political texting, you can download the book, 8 Pro Tips for Political Texting. And we appreciate you checking that out. And Sean, why don't you tell us about Grassfire?
Yeah, grassfire.us. Again, it is becoming increasingly difficult for people to break through and actually have meaningful conversations with voters. Well, Grassfire gives you the way to do that in many different ways. Canvassing, so right there at the doorstep with the voter, paid live calling, so that voice-to-voice, that human interaction, being able to actually address whatever concerns might be out there, and petitioning. So right there at the grocery store, right in front of the grocery store, being able to get you or your issue on the ballot. And it is quite likely that someone at the doorstep, someone on the phone, someone in front of the grocery store is the only human interaction someone will have with your campaign. So make it count, and reach out to grassfire.us, and they can make sure that those interactions are impactful and deliver positive results for you and your campaign.
Well, thank you for that. Appreciate you walking through that. Today, we're going to be talking about the Olson Strategy Sweet Spot, which is a big part of our 4 pillars of strategy and how we conduct our campaigns. And so we're going to be sharing that with folks. It's a really clarifying filter that you can use to think about your strategy. So if you are thinking about running for office, a lot of people are right now thinking about 2021, 2022, do reach out to us. And whether we end up working with you or not, we only have a certain number of slots that we can do per election cycle. However, we'd love to at least have a conversation with you with what it's going to take. Have you think about the race in the context of the strategy sweet spot and some of the other distinctions we bring to our work, the filters that we bring to think about how, whether it makes sense for you to run. Because as we have talked about, we are about empowering political leaders throughout this country to help reignite American patriotism. And the truth is, for you, it might be running for office. It might also just be being a leader in your community who takes on issues, being an activist. It could be being a donor and a fundraiser for political causes. I don't know what it is, but we can help you be as effective as possible. We'd love to have a conversation with you. So if you would like to learn more about Olson Strategies, that's our political consulting and political coaching business. That's olsonstrategies.com, OLSON for that. So we would love to work with you. But let's go into the show a little bit and let's talk about some of the big things that are happening today. Sean, as you and I were talking before the show, Amy Coney Barrett is going to be the nominations being moved to the floor of the Senate.
Yeah.
And what do you think is unique about that?
Well, it was a unanimous vote. I'm guessing that's not how the Democrats on the Senate committee intended it to be billed, but they chose to boycott the vote. And that's their prerogative, but it means she passed out of the Senate Judiciary Committee 12-0. In my book, that's unanimous. And
pretty good.
Yeah. So far, no dissenting votes on Amy Coney Barrett.
Do you think it'll be unanimous on the floor of the Senate?
I highly doubt it, but it will. This is actually going to become pretty interesting, though. I think is. Joe Manchin, I think, has already said, well, he's going to vote no because of the process, not necessarily because of Amy Coney Barrett. So don't worry, West Virginia. At some point, someday, he'll vote for a conservative nominee to the Supreme Court. It's just not any of the ones you've seen so far, but don't worry. Keep waiting. But Doug Jones is going to be in a real spot here. Does he go down with the ship, or does he try to show that he's open-minded and willing to vote with the Republicans on this? Now that Gary Peters is in a race, can he avoid what the talk will be, especially in suburban areas? Now a majority of Americans support.
That is interesting that in the last month, and it's really because she's handled herself well. I think the president has handled it well. I think Lindsey Graham has handled the whole process well. It's been a pretty good process. I think Democrats did learn their lesson somewhat from the last nomination, that they really showed their true colors in public, and it was not popular with American people. And but the way she handled herself, people now support her nomination, and the process worked a little bit closer to how it's supposed to. Even being in an election year and being this close to the election, all the complaints that the Democrats have actually, in some way, has had a positive impact.
Oh, agreed. I think it really shows that she was the perfect pick for this moment. Mm-hmm. and some people said, oh, maybe she should have been the pick a couple of years ago. I think the president's had a plan, and
I think he had a sense that it could go this way, and it isn't really shocking. I think a lot of people had a sense that it could end up being this way, just the natural course of things, and having her be the one at this moment would make a lot more sense.
Yeah, and there was a lot less to even try to fabricate on her.
Mm-hmm.
So I look. I think it's a
I think they would have. I think there's actually maybe something to say. When there's a nomination to be made, it needs to be made. And then if the Senate's in the same party, then they'll move forward. Or if they're not, they may not move forward. But there's something to be said that when this is true in all elections, the closer you are to election day, the more the elected officials will do the people's will.
Yeah.
And will do a better job for the people. When a senator gets elected, they're there for 6 years, and oftentimes in that first 2 years of their term, they will vote against their state. They will do things that the constituents hate because they know within another 2 years, when they get into their real election cycle, people will have forgotten.
Yeah.
So 6 years is a long time, and so. Yeah, honestly, it probably actually worked out better that this was close to the election, because the Democrats didn't want to just show how nasty they could be. I mean, Mazie Hirono did a pretty good job when she asked Amy Coney Barrett if she'd ever sexually assaulted anyone. But it's just pretty remarkable. Well, moving on from that, I was a little bit shocked, and I'm interested in your thoughts on this. So we have been served up a healthy dose from the media and Democrats that Republicans are racist, and it's an old trope. They did this to George W. Bush in 2000. They've done it, ever since Saul Alinsky in the 70s sent a bunch of Democrat liberal activists to a George H.W. Bush speech. He had the liberal activists wearing hoods and pretending to be KKK members. They have been trying to, this has been a tactic that they've used, because if you can get that moniker onto somebody, then you really dehumanize them, because those are people to be scorned. Any racist, any true racist is a person to be scorned. And so if you can tag your political opponent that way, then you can make them into, subhuman, honestly, if they're truly a racist. So Kamala Harris made news saying to the press and to whatever sort of rally may have been there, 5 people in the room or outside. So she said that, yes, she thinks that the president is racist. And I'm curious what your thoughts are on that, because we talked to a couple of our colleagues in the last day, and I think that's possibly worse than the deplorables comment from Hillary Clinton, because it basically tags a majority of the country as racist and people to be scorned, people to be, it's just, it dehumanizes half of the population. It seems to me that probably, while people won't talk too much about it, probably ticks them off.
Yeah.
Half the country thinks that about regular people who are not. They're the furthest thing from it.
Yeah, exactly. I think it's interesting because some of the liberal talking heads have gone further, like the Donnie Deutsches of the world have actually said, yeah, I'm going to just say it. I think that if you're voting for the president, you're a racist.
And they go further. There's other people like the Truth and Reconciliation Committee that Robert Reich was pushing. These ideas, these are retribution towards people that you have political disagreements with. You paint them with a broad brush that's a hateful brush, and it marks people for scorn, and also makes it so it's okay to have, frankly, violence towards somebody who like that. If someone's a Hitler, if someone's a Nazi, then what that opens up a lot of options as to how you can treat that person.
So I think there's a couple things going on. I think it's what it has created, though, is the shy Trump voter, which we've talked about on the show quite a bit. Like, look, I don't need people telling me that how terrible I am for, wanting freedom
Lower taxes.
and lower taxes and freedoms. And so, you know what? I'm just not going to tell anybody anything. I'm going to bide my time, and don't worry, I'll be there and vote. But you're not going to know about it.
So I don't know how seriously anybody would take this whole truth and reconciliation or whatever Robert Reich called it, but the idea of like having commissions to figure out who are these terrible people who voted for a Republican, and then to go and take actions against them. Then you get a phone call from a pollster, and we through Grassfire fulfills polls for a lot of the top pollsters in the country, does the live calling and other ways for them to be able to do their magic on their analysis. And there are people who just don't want to talk to a pollster because it's not really true, but there's a sense that on the other end of the phone, there's somebody who's getting your answers, and maybe they know who you are, maybe they don't. I've talked about doing an election in the Northeast in an area that's heavily union, and Republicans would not answer polls in that area because they have a sense that it might be the union boss having people call to see if they're following the union's endorsements. So that's a real concern for some folks. So when you have these ideas of having people going back, if you're painting people with a broad brush like Kamala Harris has done in the media, and of course it's going to show up in the debate tonight. I mean, it's going to be one of the whole topics on the foreign policy debate is going to be racism. So that is it just gets tiresome for half the country because we know that that's just not true, and it is. It's just interesting. I have a feeling that it might be like the deplorables, but people aren't talking about it. And they're going to be, I think people are going to be surprised by that. A lot of people are just really offended by elitists saying that. And when at the same time, their view of folks is slightly, they might be guilty of what they're calling other people and how they present issues and whatnot. So moving on to other things going on in the news, it's fascinating. I'm going to share my screen. I'm on Twitter here. So on Twitter right now, trending, this is like one of the best examples of fake news and fake news fact checking. So we've been talking about a lot of fake news recently, and we've been talking about the fact checkers basically being fake. And this is the perfect example. So they have Twitter, social media is pushing this. How is this trending? This is not actually trending. Nobody is like super interested on this, and no one's like tagging this. This is not something that's happening organically, but it's the number one thing that's trending on Twitter right now. Joe Biden will not raise taxes to, quote, a level never seen before, end quote, according to AP and fact checkers. That is amazing because it's on its face. It's an impossible statement to prove what they just said there. They're saying that Joe Biden will not raise taxes to a level never seen before. How can you say that? Because that is something in the future that has never, ever happened before. We have no idea whether he would. It's someone's opinion that he will do it to a level never seen before. So, Sean, I don't know if you got that, but it's amazing that can be presented as a fact checking. Someone, the president says Joe Biden will raise taxes to a level never seen before. That is an opinion about the future. And then he gets fact checked about having an opinion about Joe Biden, who will raise taxes significantly. And, what are they saying? Never seen before in all of history? I mean, maybe there's somebody who is taxed at 100% or I don't know. I don't know what they did in the Roman days, but it's kind of an absurd thing to have as a fact check.
It is. It absolutely is, and it goes back to the fact check example I've used on here a couple of times, which is Joe Biden calling soldiers to their face stupid bastards, and the fact check was that was a joke.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I don't know how fact checkers know that for a fact it's a joke.
Mm-hmm.
That doesn't mean that Joe Biden didn't say it was a joke. Okay. But
so here's the thing: is what's good for the goose is good for the gander. I get that was a joke.
Yeah.
I think it was a stupid joke. I don't think it was that funny, but
yeah.
He actually said, "You stupid bastards, clap you bastards," whatever it was, and he actually said that, and it's on video. And then you have at the same time, and you have ads that are being run that aren't being able to be taken off the air, where an anonymous source says that the president said something negative about the military, and the people who are actually there and have gone on the record, like 20 people, have said, well, that never happened. The people who actually went on the record, 20 plus people, say that never happened. And then the one anonymous source says that it did happen, and that doesn't get fact checked. Now, in both cases, if let's take the example that maybe the president said it, he didn't. I mean, that's just crazy to think he did, because that wouldn't even make sense. People wouldn't say something like that in public unless they're joking. Honestly, no one would ever say something like that. But let's take the case that they both were stated. You can't know exactly what someone's thinking. It would require someone to be able to be a mind reader. Now, what you can do is be like, would it ever make sense for someone to say something like that in public if they weren't joking? Well, no. But the point of it is you just don't know. And one's on video. One of them we can actually see. One of them is an anonymous source, and 20 plus people who went on the record said that it never happened. And it just shows that it doesn't work the same way on both sides. And I don't know if the media doesn't get that, or if they do get it and they just don't care.
Yeah.
I have a feeling that their filter is so strong that they just don't see it. Big blind spot.
I would agree. I think that's actually it. I mean, now I get that my filter is typically that it's that I tend to err on the side of incompetence versus malicious intent.
Mm-hmm.
By and large, that's just kind of how I tend to view the world. But in this instance, first off, I think they think they're being fair. That's really the wild part about it, and that's a dangerous combination when you can't see that and you think you're being fair, and it's unfair that half of America thinks you're being unfair.
Exactly. It's definitely it's something that I don't know what the answer is as to what will happen going forward. I do think that we've gotten to a place where it is so it's so obvious. Everything that's happened the last 2 weeks has been beyond the pale, with social media shutting people down, with the media not covering a legitimate story. One of the things that we mentioned is the foreign attacks on Trump and the election. So I'm concerned, based on how the media handles things, that I don't expect that that's going to be covered. I don't know. You probably have watched MSNBC since it was announced. I have not jumped over there yet.
Yeah, I mean, I think what little bit I've been able to catch, it's we all knew foreign interference was coming. And what they don't tell is the part which is that this is in an effort to defeat the president.
Yeah.
So, good, Russia's back. And so you either
without the context, that's how they handle it over there right now.
Yep. And so now the interesting thing, of course, is that so they say this, and then so either there's PTSD going on over there. Like, oh my God, Russia again! I can't take it. I thought this is the way we were going to get rid of it 3 different times. So they're like, oh no. So I think it's actually having more of a negative. Like, no, not again.
Maybe.
And
I have a sense that that's how smart people who are paying attention a lot and have been around it a lot think about it, like you and I and probably people watching this. But there's a possibility that all it needs to be said is Russia, election, Trump, and for enough people, probably majority of the people who are watching MSNBC and CNN, it just brings back all the feelings they had for the last few years about this. The facts don't matter. I mean, the facts really just don't matter for people. It's the emotions. So they get the emotions back of, oh my gosh, Russia collusion and all this stuff. They get the feelings like it's true, and they're right back into that point of view, even if they intellectually know it's not true. They still have the same effect, and it still has the same impact on their possible voting decisions. Of course, most of those folks were already going to be against our team. It's just a question as to how engaged they were going to be. But if you can inflame the passions, then that might get people to be more active.
Yeah, that's a good point.
So let's go into the Olson Strategy Sweet Spot and share that with folks. We're going to have a little bit of a shorter show today, I think, because we're going to be doing a recorded interview with a pastor who has led a lot of efforts to engage pastors and churches across the country and being able to help the folks in their church to be active civically and to vote. And that's going to be something we're going to be talking with him about here shortly. And we will have that for you on a subsequent show. We will record that interview and then do it on one of our live shows. So right now I'd like to talk about the Olson Strategy Sweet Spot. So several years ago, I went about the process. I'm a big fan of Sun Tzu and the Art of War. And Sun Tzu talks about the idea of knowing yourself and knowing your enemy. And this idea is based off of that. So I'm just going to give the pictorial way it looks, and it's basically a Venn diagram. So you imagine that you have 3 circles overlapping like that, and you ultimately have your strengths and you have your opponent's weaknesses. And we can talk a little bit more about what each of these look like in a second. And you might have, in some races, you might have a bunch of people running, and you would want to do this for every single person. And there's some other things that we do on this, around our 4 pillars of strategy, but this is part of the first pillar, which is the where pillar, like where you're going, because this is ultimately where you want to be focused. So you have your strengths up here. So if you're listening on the podcast, you can go to politicaltradesecrets.com. You can see a pictorial diagram of this. But let's say there's the 3 overlapping circles there, and the one in the top left, you have your strengths. So this represents everything that you could possibly say about yourself that's good, your background, your bio, the messages that you have that you really want to tell people about, all the things that you think are great about who you are. There's a lot of stuff you can do to actually go about distinguishing that and defining that and discovering what people like. Then you have your opponent's weaknesses, and this might be from opposition research, it might be from polling you do, it might be just obvious. There's things that the opponent is weak on. It could be even stuff you can just tell they don't like talking about because they're weak on it. And then you have this circle at the bottom, you have voters' concerns. And when I say concerns, for us, concerns just means things that they care about, things that they're concerned about, things that occupy their mind, what's important to them. So you look at those, and there's going to be some things that are your strength that nobody that this might be a strength that you have that's in this part of the circle that doesn't overlap at all with your opponent's weaknesses or with voters' concerns. So it might be something you love talking about, like maybe you're an expert on basket weaving and you're running for Congress and you would be like the top basket weaver in Congress. Well, neither, I wouldn't say that's a weakness of your opponent if they're not good at basket weaving, and maybe they are good at basket weaving. I have no idea, but it definitely is not going to be a concern of the voters. So that's definitely not going to be one that's overlapping with your any of the other circles. Maybe you have something that you really hate about your opponent. You just absolutely hate about the opponent. Actually, a lot of people spend time in this little area that overlaps your strengths and your opponent's weaknesses. One area that shows up a lot is hypocrisy. That maybe your opponent's a hypocrite on some issue and you're good on that issue and you just think that everybody in the world should care about it. And our experience over the years is that oftentimes voters just don't care because I think they just assume that there's a lot of hypocrites in politics and whatnot. So it doesn't make it into the voters' concerns. But if you really want to get the sweet spot, you have something that is a strength for you, is a weakness for your opponent, and is something that voters are concerned about. So let's say taxes is a perfect example. So I think the president is going to talk about it. We just saw, clearly if it's trending on Twitter, and with 50 Cent saying this week that he doesn't want to become 20 Cent, that's pretty powerful.
Yeah.
I'm one of the people who hopes that the president does mention that in the debate tonight because it's a pretty strong messaging. So that is something that voters, that is both a strength for the president, is his tax plan and his economic results that he's created. It's definitely a weakness for Biden. He's said that he will raise your taxes and his tax plan is going to be expensive. And then it is something that I think voters are concerned about. Now, is it the top issue? I don't know about that, but is it economic concerns is definitely one or two tied in with coronavirus and every survey that we've seen. So if you can talk about that, that's going to be in this overlapping area that has all three of these. If you can have all three of those filters, that is the sweet spot. And, the idea that he who chooses the battlefield usually wins the battle. If you can talk about then taxes and the economy, then you are, in that case, you are winning the fight for choosing the battlefield. And you're more likely going to win that debate each time. And sometimes you don't even have to attack your opponent. By just choosing what is being talked about, you are more likely going to put your opponent into a weaker position. So that's the Olson Strategy Sweet Spot. And Sean, I'm curious, as we talk about it, we've used this for a decade at least. Yeah. And any examples where you think that was like, it really clarified how we were approaching an election? Or is there an example where you think in the current environment, most people are paying attention to the presidential race, or maybe even a Senate campaign, where that could make a difference if someone started thinking about it that way?
Well, one thing I want to say is knowing what the voters' concerns are is critical.
Yeah.
And while there are three equal circles on there, I would say that it is the one that gets ignored the most.
It's amazing. So many times they just focus, a candidate really wants to focus on the area where it just overlaps between their strength and their opponent's weakness. And it's your perceptions. I want to be clear. It's your perceptions of what those are. So you have to be really inquisitive and you have to be really open to possibly learning things that you don't want to learn in that process. But because there might be things you think are a strength for you that everybody else is like, nah, that's actually one of the reasons we don't like you.
Yeah. Well, I'll give an example of something that I've seen in one race in particular. I can think about the survey just making this very clear. And it was around military service. Mm-hmm. Like, we were working with somebody who had military service, wanted to make that like the issue. He had served, the opponent hadn't. And while that was an important thing, differentiator, it was not on the top concerns of voters. Mm-hmm. So, it was really, so how do we work in, because it builds credibility on your end. So it's still something you want to make sure that's part of your messaging, but it's not like,
it can't be the whole thing, because if it's the whole thing, it's people will be like, that's neat, but it's not going to have them choose you in the voter booth.
So it's like, okay, well, what is is the issue? Because maybe the issue is trust. Mm-hmm. Like, people just don't trust elected officials anymore. Well, okay, they do trust the military, so that is something. And if this other person is a used car salesman, okay, well then that's the differentiator.
And what that is it's about trust, and that's what you're getting to then. Yeah. So the military, and there's other, this would actually go into what is the second pillar in our 4 pillars of strategy, which we'll do an episode on those, like an overview at some point. The second pillar is the why, and you really get a good sense of everything about everybody in the race and what builds on what this core distinction is, the sweet spot. And you're building the case for that ultimate sweet spot in what you're describing. Instead of it being, we need more veterans in Congress, which unfortunately just doesn't speak to people. Voters have said in surveys that we've seen that they don't think that's the most important thing. You can disagree with it, but what you're saying is that can then, instead of focusing on that specific message, taking the military experience to get to a core issue of trust in government is really what the sweet spot is, and you're just building the case for that. And that's how this looking at it through this filter can really help you take what some of those strengths are and build it towards whatever that core distinguisher is.
That's one of the violations I kind of see of this. Now where I've seen it work is I can still remember a campaign where ironically, it was on taxes and spending, mm-hmm. and our candidate we were working with came out and said, "Okay, I'm opposing additional taxes and spending. Like, we don't need any more of that." And came up with an example like of things to cut, like day one, like cutting their own salary, getting rid of the government cars for government employees, that some stuff like that, like tangible things that you can look at. And that was just going to be one part of a conversation about taxes and spending, because everybody else in the race had a bit of a checkered record on spending and taxes, and it was an issue that people cared about. Mm-hmm. But what ended up happening was with the first rollout of those few things to get rid of, the other main competitors in the race said, "Oh, that's a gimmick. That doesn't really cut anything." And what we found is that people liked it. Like, oh, hey, there's actually things that are going to get cut. This is amazing. And so we just ended up saying, well, that's the differentiator that voters care about. And mm-hmm. So we talked about it. It's not that there weren't other things to talk about. We had a whole plan of other things to talk about. But when you really get into it, and it made a difference. And so, that was a 5-way primary, and that candidate ended up getting 56% of the vote. Yeah. And in some of the verbatims that came back, it was like, well, this candidate's the only one talking about something I care about.
And verbatims, for anybody watching that's in a poll, it's an open-ended question that people can just respond however they want to respond, and it gets captured verbatim to how the voter says it. And that's extremely valuable. There's been times where a voter says something that's so clear that really captures what's happening in the race that we've pretty much take that and run with what they said, because it is so wise, frankly. What this ultimately does. So oftentimes people think about just the two top circles, your strengths and the opponent's weaknesses, and that's one of the biggest pitfalls for a campaign. And it's easy to fall into that. I would say that we have to guard against it ourselves. I mentioned the hypocrisy thing. I don't know why it is, and by the way, this is for right now. It might be in 2 years from now, all of a sudden voters do care about that. I mean, voters do say they care about trust, but I think they just assume that hypocrisy is already in there. So there's a lot of Republicans out there. I do know Republicans in particular cannot stand hypocrisy, and Republican activists and Republican candidates and like anybody and it just it really grinds our gears, and yet the overall electorate doesn't seem to care about it. And I know this because there's been many campaigns in the past where I've really wanted to push some kind of hypocrisy message, and in the polling would show that it didn't make a difference, and it really finally I was just like, I get it. I get that they are not all that concerned about it, and it's probably because they just assume that everybody is a hypocrite. That being said, what this does present, though, is clarity around a contrast. And, sometimes people think when we talk about contrast as a political consultant, it's a euphemism for slinging mud. It's not. It's just that you have to make a choice. There has to be some kind of contrast. Otherwise, you're choosing between this and this. And for a lot of people, that's really hard. So you need to have like some kind of directional contrast that gives people something to choose between. And unless you can distinguish that in the race, you're not going to give people an actual choice. So there has to be that contrast. And if you give them a choice between two things they don't care about, that is not a choice for them. It's just the same as not giving them a choice.
Absolutely. Well, we have a question from Periscope. I do have one quick question before we get to that. Mm-hmm. What do you say to the campaigns or the candidates that try to maybe shore up a perceived weakness of their own that might be a strength of another campaign? What do you say about that? And does that really fit into the strategy sweet spot, or do you see that a little differently?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So the second pillar, which we can spend more time on it, and it's something that we didn't create ourselves. This one we create ourselves. The second pillar is basically the message matrix, and it's the 4 boxes, and you go through and you really get what you would say about yourself, what your opponent would say about themselves, what you would say about your opponent, and what your opponent would say about the opponent. And when you do that, you get a real good sense of the whole race. And what that doesn't have is it doesn't have the voters' concerns as a part of that. I think that's partly, that diagram is partly, and people have been using that for decades. Yeah. It's partly why voters sometimes get forgotten in the equation, which is why we created the strategy sweet spot. This is a case-by-case basis when it comes to a campaign, it comes to a candidate. Even though he's now a disgraced former media person, Chris Matthews, before he was, having a tingle up his leg about Obama and everything else, before he kind of went off the deep end, he wrote a book called Hardball 30 years ago. And it's a really good book, and I highly recommend it. This is before he got crazy. And it's where the show came out of, was because of the title of the book. It's a really good book. And one of the chapters is called Hang a Lantern on Your Problem. So you're going to have to wade through this. Everybody in the world has something that can be attacked. Yeah. And the reason why is because if you don't have anything that can be attacked, they'll make it up. Mm-hmm. And if it's an important race that's a lot of power is at stake, your opponent is going to make up something about it. even if it's not there. Or they'll be able to take something that's innocent or take something that's good and put a different context on it, a different filter, and then all of a sudden it will look bad. You see it happening in the news all the time. So you really have to think about it nefariously when you look at yourself. You have to think about, how would the opponent take some of my best stuff and make it the worst? And you have to think about that. And then you have to kind of look at those, what do you need to do? Some of them, will the voters care about it? That's the number one thing. Will voters actually care about this? If the voters aren't going to care about it, then you don't need to spend any time with it at all. If it seems too outlandish, you may not have to deal with it. Sometimes things just aren't believable, but there are some things that might be showstoppers that you will need to deal with. And there are some things that you may not need to deal with, but you need to have a plan to deal with. So what I'm saying here is, you don't spend too much time dealing with these unless you absolutely have to. And then I had one other thought about that. It's the main thing, though, is oftentimes we see the Me Too strategies, and I don't mean that in the hashtag Me Too. We see the I want more of what he has. So, for instance, we've seen this a couple times. Actually, I think this is actually happening in the Michigan race right now, the Senate race. So you have John James, who is a Army helicopter pilot, and a really remarkable person. And he founded a business, just really a great background. And then you have Senator Peters, who, I don't know, he's so nondescript, I can't even tell you anything about him. Yeah. But what he's doing, he's running right now a veteran ad. So it seems like he thinks, oh my goodness, this guy that I'm running against is this, veteran that everybody likes, and he's gaining on me. Oh, I need to have some more veteran stuff for myself. And I would say that maybe that'll help him a little bit, but ultimately he probably really needs to distinguish what's unique about himself that matches up well against James, and then voters also care about. And I don't think he's doing that. And that's actually one of the reasons why I think that, I don't know, John James it's a tough state to win, but I think he might actually be able to pull it off. And that tells me, one, that the incumbent is scared. Two, that he's doing the typical Me Too strategy. Oh, I've got that too. Oh, I need more of that. And you're trying to shore up the weakness a week before the election. And that's, I think that's usually a losing strategy. So hopefully that helps do that. And I'm going to put up Mark J's question.
Perfect. And I'll just go ahead and read it for folks. Love this strategy. How early should someone considering a run for office start surveying voters? Great question. I'll go ahead. I think there's a couple of things here. One is as far as an actual poll, I think I'd do that a little closer to time. But what you want to know is, what is it that really speaks to voters when you do this? So, whenever you're looking to do this, it could be before you enter the race. It could be, right after you're in the race is when some people do it. But just knowing, hey, these are the things that voters care about, and that move them, and know that you have ways to do it. So, one of the things that in the strategy sweet spot, right, we talk about, what voters' concerns are. Now, you also need to make sure that they match up with your strengths and your opponent's weaknesses. So knowing what you really want to be asking about is, okay, what are the things that are strengths of mine that voters also care about, that are also a contrast for our opponent? And this is can be particularly difficult in primaries.
Because oftentimes you're going to have the same positions as most of the people, and
so you got to be very detailed in what the differences might be there. And the number one issue for them is being, pro-life, for example, and everybody's pro-life. Well, you just want to make sure that the voters that are pro-life know that you are pro-life. That's going to be a part of it. Now, being able to differentiate yourself on that could be more difficult. So there's going to be some of that. But I do think knowing where the voters are as early as you can in a race is the critical thing to know. So
there's a critical word. So start surveying voters. You can start immediately, but and I assume you mean surveying in the like an actual poll way. So all of surveying is conversations.
Yeah.
So you can start having conversations with people. Now, to have a paid poll, I would say probably on average, the ones that will make the biggest difference in the race are going to be done about 6 months out, and then like 3 months out, maybe 1 month out. People don't make their decisions really honestly until the last month. And it depends now with so much mail in voting, that election day really takes about a month. So, that's when the polling really makes a difference, is when you're starting to spend money. But as far as surveying voters, you can start doing that immediately. We have actually taken on in the last several years that even if we have a candidate who's running for a statewide office or is running for a congressional office, they typically aren't going to be themselves as a candidate aren't going to be able to make the difference on the grassroots because they can't personally have enough one-on-one conversations to make the difference. They're going to have to talk to a lot more voters at a time to make the difference, and then have a grassroots army. So they need to be talking to volunteers. The reason I say that is, but we still have them make calls. So we use a phone technology that allows them they don't have to dial a phone number. They just hit next call, next call, next call. And we like to have the candidate pretty much immediately start having conversations with voters, because you are going to start to get a sense for, when you talk about your strengths and you talk about the opponents, because that's going to come up in the conversations, you're going to get a sense for what the voters' concerns are about. So if we can come up with a voter list that's basically the people that you need to be talking to, and that we can have the candidate maybe it might just be 30 calls a week that they make to that list. Is that going to make the difference in the election as far as voter contact? No. But what it is going to do is it's going to help the candidate become a better communicator with the voters that they need to be communicating with. It's going to help develop the campaign message. And you can just tell when you have a conversation with somebody, when you're speaking about something that is enlivening to them, is lighting them up, is getting them, it actually speaks to their life. And you're also going to they're going to share stories about their life that you can also weave into your message. And, examples, I was talking to, a small business owner who they went to the state to deal with some regulation, and the state, it took them 3 years to deal with it, that kind of stuff. You can pull these into it and make it really personal, and tie your message to real world stories that really speak to voters. So I would say almost immediately you want to start talking to family and friends, one, to get them to tell you what your strengths are.
Yeah.
What they think that they really like. Now they're a different kind of audience. They're going to probably think things that let's say you have crazy Uncle Bernie, the socialist. He's not going to like your tax cutting plan, most likely. So, if you talk to, somebody who's like a completely different political party than you, but also his family, well, then they're probably going to not like your positions. They're going to like other qualities about you. But, you take all that into consideration, you think about it. And then you also, as you're talking to people in the community, you get a sense for what they are not as interested in, your opponents. And in all of that, you're starting to really get a sense for the zeitgeist, which we talk about. It's really important to get a sense of what's actually having your pulse on what's going on. It's one reason why I think President Trump is a really good communicator. He's created a feedback loop. And that's something else that we do, is we try to create some kind of feedback loop through social media and through grassroots involvement. And we do our best to make sure that we can tell if what we're talking about is really connecting with the voters, because that is by far the most important part of this formula. So hopefully that helped answer that question for you, Mark.
Yeah, great.
Sean,
great question.
Anything else that you'd like to say about the strategy sweet spot?
No, I think hopefully that gives you a little for those listening a little taste of really how we dig into these things and take a look and make sure that we're delivering for our clients in a way that it's very easy to miss, especially where the voters might be on something. So we definitely
we know that it's easy to miss because we have to remind ourselves of this. Like for any given campaign, I probably draw out this diagram. We have a bunch of tools, a lot of processes that we use to really get at this. We have different methods that we go through to get at this to really distinguish it for ourselves. But I draw out that diagram for any given race probably 10 to 20 times to think about it, because it's so easy in the middle of the race, when you're in the middle of the weeds, when you're in the middle of the forest, to not be able to take that bird's eye view and look at the race. So it's really important to continually come back to that, and to continually, I would say this is by far the biggest pitfall, is that voters get forgotten in this process. You get in the middle of it, especially if we talked about this yesterday. It's really amazing. The president doesn't feel the need to defend every single attack. If you've noticed, and I wouldn't be surprised if it's the case. He's getting attacked a lot, so there's stuff he has to deal with, but he doesn't take the bait on every single attack. And that does tell you there's a certain presence of mind that he has. It is hard when you're in a debate of some kind and you have your opponent just going after you on things that are completely unfair, and they're making stuff up, and to think, do voters really care about that? And if they don't, do I need to deal with it? And to just let it go. For most people, if they have an unjust attack, no matter what, they're going to want to deal with it. And it's oftentimes going to get them off track. So you're going to get, honestly, people get triggered throughout the election. So you have to come back to this and keep thinking about the voters' concerns. I want to tell a story about one of the best examples of this. And I think it's probably the first time you and I worked together where I had brought the strategic sweet spot in. And it's one of our favorite people that we've worked with, which is Congressman Joe Wilson. And he had been in the situation where there was the President Obama was doing the joint session in Congress on Obamacare, and Joe informed him that he was incorrect on some issues, in particular illegal immigrants getting health care under the plan, and he yelled "You lie" famously when the room was dead quiet. So Joe ended up in a tough race, and he kind of became a national figure in a matter of knows And that wasn't really what his strength was. What his strength was he's the local guy who really cared about the district. He knows the district inside and out. He frankly, amazingly knows, it feels like almost every constituent, or at least knows their family. And he has this real granular level of understanding of the people that he represents. And that was getting lost when he became this national figure. And it was not, being a national figure was not going to be how he was going to win. So we brought it back to being very local and very much about the local communities. And we thought about what voters cared about. At the time, we were not far past the 2008 financial crisis. The economy wasn't where it needed to be. And it was really clear that through his service, he'd always been very engaged with local businesses as part of that granular level of understanding his district. So we set out using the strategic sweet spot. And one of the best examples of this, we set out to create a really clear distinction between the candidates. His opponent was probably not a bad guy, but he was definitely going to be a lockstep Nancy Pelosi Democrat and was going to support most of the policies that she had been promoting, all of which were job killers. And he had the unfortunate name of being named Rob Miller. And so we made the whole campaign about Joe means jobs. And Joe would go to every local business. Sometimes he would even work a day in the business and learn exactly how they went about. It's kind of like undercover boss. We had him actually walk a day in their shoes. And it was really endearing to people. and they getting to see their congressman really understanding what their life was like and really focused on job creation in the district and reducing regulations, keeping taxes low, all the stuff that a Republican would typically talk about, but having an emotional connection to it. So Joe Means Jobs became the rallying cry. And then it was Rob Miller, job killer. So we had the case of, you have the opponent, Rob Miller, job killer. We had Joe Means Jobs, and jobs was the number one concern in the district by far at that point. It was like, I think the next issue was maybe 10% of what jobs was in the district at the time. So with that contrast laid out, Joe had one of the best victories that he had ever had up to that point. He's now in a slightly different district after redistricting, but that was a really important contrast to present, and was very powerful. So that's a good case study of how that worked and worked well, and really listening to the district and taking a path that was different than what I think most people would have wanted to. Most people would like to be a national figure, but we went hyper local because of the voters' concerns, because that's what the voters wanted at that time.
Yeah, well, a great example, and it showed out there with the voters, which is what matters.
Mm-hmm.
And speaking of showing out and showing up with voters, we've got great ways for you to do that. Grassfire LLC, visit them at grassfire.us, and they can help you connect with voters at their doorstep, in front of the grocery store, or through your phone with live calling, and you can connect with folks on their mobile device right here with 10centtexting.com and get a rich image through that really connects with voters right where they are. 82% of people open every text they get. It's compulsory, and so you can do that. And
it's interesting with so many texts coming through. I had like 82 or so unread texts in the last couple of days, and it's totally not even being aware of it. I spent like 15 minutes because I couldn't stand the 82 little red dot saying I had 82 unread messages, and I just spent like 15 minutes going through every single text. And did I read them really closely? No, but I saw every single text, which with the rich media, if someone had like a picture in there or a GIF, like I would have totally gotten their message. But I went through all of them, and it was a lot of messages in 15 minutes. But I totally did exactly what you just talked about. I went through every single one of them. And then also, if you are, so hopefully going through the Strategy Sweet Spot gave you just a tip of the iceberg of what we do, and we work with candidates who are running, or with an independent expenditure committee or any other kind of organization that's trying to make a difference on an issue. The Strategic Sweet Spot gives you a sense of some of the stuff that we do. And if you want to work with us, if you would like to make it onto our dance card for the next election cycle, we have limited spots to be able to do that. olsonstrategies.com. That's OLSON strategies.com, and reach out there. You can email us at Dustin at Olson Strategies or Sean at olsonstrategies.com. And I really appreciate people joining today. I appreciate you listening on the podcast platforms. Please do review and rate and follow. And that really, we do appreciate everybody who's done that. And we really appreciate everybody who joined us for the live stream today, and for the comments that we've received and questions. Thank you for that. It really does make it more fun when we're getting that feedback loop. It's exactly what we were talking about earlier. Like when we get to actually have a conversation with people, it really adds something extra special to the show. So we get a lot out of that. So thank you for that. And Sean, anything else that you want to tell people as we go into the day and we watch the president and former vice president tonight in the debate?
Yeah, well, I'm looking forward to the debate from Nashville tonight, and really just want to acknowledge you and the Strategy Sweet Spot and being able to share that with folks. So thanks for bringing that up today. I think it was really helpful for folks, and I look forward to hearing, if people thought it was helpful, and hearing back from folks over the next few days. So
awesome. Well, thank you, and be sure to check in. We're going to have in the next couple episodes, we'll have our interview with Pastor J.C. Church, and looking forward to that, and talking about how to engage Christians to be active in public life. And so do check that out coming up soon. And be sure to check out politicaltradesecrets.com for show notes and anything else that we might have there, and to sign up to get updates by email and whatnot. Thank you very much, and we appreciate it. This has been another Political Trade Secrets.
Join us next time by subscribing on iTunes, and get show notes and sign up for our newsletter at politicaltradesecrets.com.